Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are stepping on to, well, probably the most expensive, most futuristic, and definitely the most contentious set in the world right now, Hollywood,
Yeah.
where, the traditional craft of acting is being fundamentally challenged. The camera isn't just watching human performers anymore, it's scanning them, basically turning them into code.
That's right. And we're really focusing squarely on that central conflict, in the modern entertainment industry.
Mhm.
On one side, you've got this almost irresistible economic pressure for Hollywood to just fully adopt generative AI. I mean, it's cheap, it's fast, it's always available.
Right.
But that force is just colliding head on with these really formidable human barriers.
Yeah.
You've got labor law, intellectual property rights, and frankly, the collective will of the people who actually, make the stuff.
And our sources for this deep dive, it's a really fascinating mix. We've got economic analysis, tech forecasting, and some deep legal context, especially from that post-2023 strike landscape. They paint a really complex picture. This isn't like a simple story of AI replacing actors. It's way more about a contentious, legally tricky hybrid future, something that, honestly, neither the studios nor the actors probably wanted initially.
So our mission today is really to unpack this whole integration. We need to understand the just staggering financial incentives that kind of created this problem in the first place.
Yeah.
Then there's the state-of-the-art technology that's enabling it all. And finally, that really robust legal framework that human artists successfully built to protect themselves.
And here's the big takeaway we're driving toward, the kind of strategic insight that changes the whole conversation. Actors, human actors, far from being obsolete, have actually strategically turned their digital likenesses into a new kind of asset class.
Yeah.
Indispensable, legally protected.
Exactly. In this algorithmic age, consent, that legally enforceable power to say yes or no to using your digital self, that's become the most valuable commodity out there.
Okay, so let's unpack all of this and see how we actually got here.
Right.
When people talk about AI in film, they often treat it like some kind of overnight invasion, right? Like it just suddenly appeared a year or two ago with deepfakes going viral.
Yeah.
But if you really dig into the source material, this is just the latest step. Okay, maybe the most profound step. But it's part of what analysts call the cinematic continuum.
That's such a crucial context to have. AI isn't some sudden, out-of-the-blue revolution. It's really an evolution built on decades of digital work, digital replication work.
Right.
Think about it. Every major tech shift in cinema, like synchronized sound back in the late 20s, or color film, later on CGI, every single time, it was met with disruption, labor resistance, people predicting the death of cinema.
What happens?
Always. And yet each time the art form just transforms. It integrates the tech rather than, collapsing under it. We really have to view the current AI debate through that same historical lens.
And that technological history, it really picks up speed with the rise of the digital double.
Yeah.
Early on, this stuff was like purely a necessity, wasn't it? Just used for things like physical imitations or stunt work that was just too dangerous or impossible for people.
Absolutely. We can trace this pretty clearly by looking at some landmark moments. If you go back to 2003, The Matrix Reloaded used digital doubles heavily for that famous Burly Brawl scene.
Oh yeah, the Agent Smith fight.
Exactly. Neo fighting dozens of Smiths. You just couldn't achieve that kind of volume and complexity with human stunt performers at the time. It was unfeasible.
Okay.
Then you see a shift from just simple stunt doubles to actual digital character transformation. Think the curious case of Benjamin Button in 2008.
Right, with Brad Pitt.
Yeah, the digital tech let his character convincingly age and de-age across a whole lifetime. That set a completely revolutionary bar for digital character work.
But then the use of digital doubles started to expand. And this is where I think the ethical lines started getting a bit blurry, moving away from just helping the actor towards maybe studio convenience.
Precisely. That's a key point.
Yeah.
In 2015, after Paul Walker tragically died during the filming of Fast and Furious 7, well, they used sophisticated digital doubles and stand-ins to complete his scenes. Now, that was often framed as a tribute, allowing the film to finish its story respectfully.
But that capability quickly moved into posthumous recreation,
Yeah.
didn't it? And that's where the ethical questions about consent and legacy got much, much sharper.
Oh, absolutely. Just a year later, 2016, Rogue One, a Star Wars story. They digitally recreated a young Princess Leia, and even more controversially, the deceased actor Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin.
How did they do that back then? Was it AI?
Not really AI as we think of it now. It was more traditional CGI and motion capture layered onto a body double actor, but it pushed that whole issue of posthumous performance and the rights of estates right to the forefront.
Yeah.
It set a kind of terrifying precedent, really, that your digital likeness was now this asset that could potentially be exploited without your current consent. It made it clear that this desperately needed legal protection.
Which brings us right up to now, the current state of the art, the true generative AI quantum leap. We're not just talking about laborious frame-by-frame CGI touch-ups anymore.
No, not at all.
We're talking deep learning that synthesizes performance from just vast amounts of data.
And the most important example, I think, of this really maturing is the de-aging work done for Martin Scorsese's The Irishman back in 2019. That's where the tech took a huge step forward. Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, they didn't use those invasive physical motion capture markers, the dots on the face, because those would have altered the actor's really subtle expressions.
Right, De Niro, Pacino, you need that subtlety.
Exactly. Instead, they use deep learning algorithms, specifically generative adversarial networks, or GANs.
Okay, so explain how that GANs approach is different from the older CGI they used for Cushing in Rogue One. What's the real difference?
The difference is really about control and authenticity. In Rogue One, they were basically building a digital puppet and then animating it. With Jans in The Irishman, the AI was trained on just massive amounts of historical footage of De Niro, Pacino, Pesci. It learned their unique facial structures, how their skin and muscles moved at different ages, how they uniquely expressed emotion.
All right.
The AI then used that knowledge to reconstruct their younger faces directly onto their current mature performance.
So the result was like a true hybrid. The directors kept the authentic, nuanced acting choices from the older performer, all the subtlety they brought, but just with the younger visuals they wanted. The performance wasn't replaced, it was kind of reskinned.
That's exactly right. It preserved the actor's unique contribution while achieving this, impossible visual effect. But what's really game-changing now, the shift we're seeing, is taking those powerful tools out of post-production and putting them right onto the set during filming.
And here's where the pace just feels exponential. We've got Robert Zemeckis' new film, here, coming out in 2025. The production used metaphysics AI tech to give them a live, real-time feed of the de-aged performances. Tom Hanks, Robin Wright.
Just think about the implications of that for creative collaboration. AI isn't just some 6-month post-production fix anymore, a Hail Mary to smooth things over later.
Right.
It's now an interactive, collaborative tool right there on set. The director, the DP, the makeup artists, and crucially, the actors themselves, everyone can see the final altered performance as it's being filmed right there on the monitor.
Wow.
That allows for immediate creative feedback, adjustments, making sure the actor's expression, the lighting, the final digital output, it's all perfectly harmonized in the moment. It fundamentally changes the craft by pulling that whole VFX pipeline right into principal photography.
That speed and integration, it's just staggering. It really suggests AI is this irresistible tool. But we have to mention the attempts at fully synthetic stuff, too, because they kind of show where the tech still hits a wall. That infamous uncanny valley problem.
Absolutely. We saw some early technical milestones, things like the 2023 short film The Frost. It was 24 minutes, script fed into DALL-E 2 for the shots, then animated by another AI. And remember that highly criticized AI-generated Coca-Cola ad from 2024.
Vaguely, yeah.
While they're technically impressive in terms of just raw output, these autonomous projects, they tend to lack character consistency, narrative coherence, and honestly, genuine emotional resonance.
And that genuine emotion part, that's where the engineers are really focused now, isn't it? They're chasing something called multimodal emotion synthesis, trying to break through that uncanny valley illusion.
Yeah, they're using AI to analyze everything simultaneously, facial expressions, vocal cues, body language, gestures, trying to create a more believable, sort of holistic emotional output.
But what's the big hurdle?
The key technical hurdle, the thing that constantly trips up the illusion, is what they call audiovisual desynchrony.
Okay.
It's that subtle but really profound mismatch between a synthetic character's voice and their facial movements, especially the tiny muscle movements around the mouth and eyes when they speak.
Oh, that makes sense. Our brains are just hardwired to spot fake faces, aren't they? If the sound of a word doesn't perfectly match the visual of the mouth making that shape.
Instantly, your brain flags it, shatters the suspension of disbelief, and you get that revulsion, that uncanny valley effect. It's not just about making it look perfect, it's about the timing being absolutely perfect too, like down to the millisecond. And AI hasn't quite mastered that yet.
So, okay, let's look ahead. Given the current pace and these limits, what do the forecasts say? What does the movie landscape look like by, say, 2030?
The consensus among researchers is that the pace is accelerating dramatically, especially in just pure photorealism. We can project pretty confidently that by 2030, AI will likely achieve near-perfect photorealism for secondary and background roles.
So, like who?
We're talking about synthespians, seamlessly populating crowd scenes, maybe performing really dangerous or repetitive stunts over and over, or delivering functional, low-nuance dialogue. Think the airline pilot with one line, the doctor delivering bad news quickly, the generic detective asking a question. Roles like that, done at a fraction of the current human cost.
Okay, that's a huge shift for the average working actor. But what about the leads, the stars, the roles that need that charisma, that it factor, carrying a complex emotional journey for 2 hours?
Yeah, for those lead performances, the ones needing deep emotional nuance, complex character arcs, that sort of intangible connection with the audience, AI is likely to remain primarily an augmentation tool by 2030.
Why is that?
The consensus holds that the technical hurdle of the uncanny valley, especially simulating genuine human consciousness and spontaneous emotion, it's just not solvable within that time frame. The core performance, the emotional intent, it still needs to be anchored by a human actor. Their work can then be digitally enhanced, reskinned, de-aged, whatever, but the human is still the anchor.
So the human role changes, but it doesn't vanish. It's almost like a promotion from just performer to maybe director of their own digital output.
Exactly. And it creates new essential human roles outside of acting, too. We're seeing the potential rise of the AI performance director or maybe a narrative curator.
What do they do?
This would be a creative professional whose job is specifically to guide, edit, and shape the AI's output. Make sure it maintains emotional integrity, character consistency, stays true to the story's themes. The machine handles the pixels and the data, but the human ensures the storytelling has coherence and, maybe a soul.
Okay, now we get to the absolute core of why this whole tech transition is being pushed so aggressively by Hollywood execs. It's the money. It's always the money, right?
Pretty much.
We need to go beyond just the big star salaries and really break down a typical production budget to see why studios are just so desperate for an alternative to the whole human talent ecosystem.
That's exactly right. Most people just focus on the huge salaries for A-listers, the above-the-line costs. But the true cost of human talent is this vast, complex web of indirect financial burdens that just inflate the budget and introduce massive variables and risks.
Okay, give us some examples. What are these hidden costs? What else is a studio paying besides just the actor's paycheck?
Well, it starts with all the union-mandated benefits and fees. For every union performer, the studio has to pay pension and health contributions, P&H. That typically runs between, say, 15% and 20% of the actor's base wages. Sometimes it can even exceed 30%, depending on the specific contract and benefit tier.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then you add the standard 10% agent or manager fees, which the studio often ends up covering directly or indirectly.
And that's all before the actor even steps foot on set.
Exactly. Then come the logistical costs. For a major star, especially on location, these are just staggering. Contracts often mandate specific levels of comfort. First-class airfare for long flights, 5-star hotels, maybe dedicated security teams, definitely private trailers on set, and an enforced per diem for meals and incidentals, often like $60 to $100 per day per person for the performer, and sometimes their required entourage. And these costs pile up daily, whether the actor is actually working that day or just on standby.
And crucially, studios also have to budget for, well, human frailties. And the clock.
Precisely. You've got the mandatory and very expensive line item for cast insurance that can cost millions, protecting the production if a key actor gets sick or injured or even just quits.
Right.
Then there's the cost of time itself. Overtime pay is strictly enforced by the unions. Time and a half after 8 hours, doubling after 12, sometimes even triple pay for holidays or certain conditions. Human actors simply cannot operate 24/7 without incurring these massive escalating costs and causing potential production delays.
So when you add it all up,
Yeah.
salaries, benefits, logistics, insurance, overtime.
Yeah.
The human cost becomes the single biggest, most variable, and most unpredictable chunk of a film budget.
Absolutely. And that provides the incredibly powerful motivation for seeking what our sources are calling the AI efficiency dividend. And this is where the numbers just become truly, truly staggering.
Yeah, this is the part that really makes you understand the studio perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
This is the financial why behind the whole disruption. When you actually quantify the potential savings by replacing or even just augmenting human labor with AI, the rationale for the pivot becomes crystal clear. Conservative analyses are projecting that AI could potentially slash overall production budgets by as much as 77% compared to current models.
77%. That's huge. Yeah. But let's break down the most shocking comparison we found in the sources.
Right.
The raw asset generation comparison. That number is just jaw-dropping.
It really is. Okay, so consider a traditional big-budget film. The source material uses a $100 million film like Oppenheimer as a kind of benchmark.
Okay.
When you calculate the total expenditure across the entire production timeline, the estimated cost of production works out to be approximately $9,260 per second of finished screen time.
$9,260 for 1 second of high-quality movie.
Right. Now compare that to the estimated cost of generating a single second of high-quality photorealistic video using the current generative AI tools. The estimates range from just 48 cents to maybe $1.52 per second.
48 cents versus over $9,000. That's a reduction of over 99.90% in just the core asset creation cost.
Yeah.
That exponential difference, that's the engine driving this whole industry shift, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The savings are systemic because AI completely bypasses that entire costly human ecosystem we just talked about.
Right.
You eliminate salaries, residuals, P&H contributions, agent fees, all the logistics like travel and per diems, cast insurance, gone. Plus, you gain the ability to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, generating endless variations on demand without ever needing overtime or breaks or catering or worrying about someone getting sick.
And this massive efficiency doesn't just save money directly on talent. It also translates into schedule compression, which in filmmaking, time is definitely money.
Big money. Oh, significantly. The entire production pipeline speeds up. Pre-production. Faster. AI can generate detailed storyboards from a script in minutes, not weeks.
Wow.
During production, think virtual sets eliminates location scouting, travel time for the whole crew. And then in post-production, AI can automate initial edits, color correction, a lot of the basic VFX work that used to tie up expensive human artists for months.
So what's the overall impact on timelines?
Industry projections are suggesting this could reduce overall production timelines by as much as 50%. 50%. It transforms filmmaking from this bespoke, labor-intensive craft into something much closer to a highly streamlined industrial manufacturing model.
And this whole cost-saving, speed-up model seems intrinsically tied to the demands of the streaming era, right?
Right.
It's not just about making one blockbuster cheaper. It's about feeding the beast, the constant global content churn that platforms like Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus demand.
Precisely. For the big streaming services, content is basically their main tool for subscriber retention. Netflix, for example, has an annual content expense hovering around, $17 million?
Yeah, huge numbers.
The imperative is constant. They have to produce content more, faster, and cheaper to keep subscribers happy, keep them paying, and boost their own profit margins. AI looks like the only industrial engine that realistically allows them to achieve that kind of volume manufacturing.
And AI also unlocks global reach and this kind of hyper-personalization that human labor just can't manage efficiently or quickly enough.
Yeah, think about localization.
Yeah.
Sophisticated AI tools can now do seamless lip syncing and voice cloning for dozens of languages. They can replicate an actor's vocal tone and match their mouth movements perfectly to, say, Japanese or German or Hindi, maximizing global revenue potential without needing expensive, often unnatural-sounding dubbing.
Okay.
And beyond that, predictive AI can analyze cultural nuances. It could potentially tailor content for regional markets, adjusting references, jokes, maybe even minor plot points to resonate better with the local audience almost in real time.
Okay, so we've got this overwhelming economic logic pushing for AI. But what does this actually mean for the human talent pool? I mean, it sounds like mass replacement is just inevitable, especially for actors who aren't, huge A-list stars.
Well, the economic logic definitely creates a powerful stratification effect, a widening gap. The A-list stars, the mega brands like your Tom Cruises or Zendayas, they're relatively safe.
Why them?
Because their unique brand value and global recognition make their digital likeness itself a highly valuable asset worth licensing, probably for a lot of money. The background actors, the extras, they're definitely being targeted for digital replication already, but they have some protection from the union's focus on minimum hiring quotas.
So the most vulnerable group then, the one the economic model seems aimed squarely at, is that middle tier.
Yes. That's what the analysis calls the vulnerable middle class of the acting profession. We're talking about the vast number of supporting roles, the guest stars on TV shows, the journeyman actors who make a living but aren't household names.
Like who specific?
Think of like the recurring medical examiner on a crime show, or the lawyer who has 3 really pivotal scenes in a movie, the specialized doctor character who delivers key exposition, or maybe the airline pilot in the opening sequence. These actors play roles that require real nuance, real skill, but they lack the kind of star power that makes them truly irreplaceable.
And why are they the primary targets for AI replacement, economically speaking?
Because their jobs are costly enough to be targeted. They incur all those P&H costs, insurance, potential overtime that we talked about. But their personal brand isn't iconic enough to be considered a highly profitable, irreplaceable asset that a studio would pay millions just to license.
So the fear is a hollowing out of that middle class of the profession.
Exactly. The economic logic suggests it could sever that traditional pathway where actors build careers moving from smaller roles up to stardom. The AI replacement revolution, realistically, starts right there in the middle.
That makes grim sense from a purely accounting perspective. But let me push back a bit here, introduce some friction. We know the SAG-AFTRA contract covers U.S.-based union workers, largely. If the cost saving is really that high, like 99% cheaper for the raw asset, won't studios just hire actors in non-union countries, scan their likenesses cheaply over there, and then use that digital replica globally, bypassing all the new U.S. contract protections entirely? Doesn't the overwhelming economic logic just win out on a global scale?
That is, without a doubt, the single greatest looming threat to the effectiveness of the SAG-AFTRA agreement, and the union is certainly aware of it. However, there are probably 3 primary constraints slowing down that kind of wholesale circumvention, at least for now.
Okay, what are they?
First, quality control. The most advanced AI performance capture technology, the really high-end stuff, is currently centered in Hollywood and linked to the major US-based VFX houses. Getting that top-tier quality elsewhere consistently might be tricky. Brand association. While a foreign non-union actor might be cheap to scan, their likeness likely lacks the global brand recognition that still helps drive box office and streaming viewership, especially for major roles. You still need recognizable faces for marketing.
Okay, quality and brand. And the third constraint.
It circles right back to our ultimate takeaway, the big one, the copyright conundrum. Even if they scan a non-union actor cheaply overseas, the studio still needs legally defensible intellectual property at the end of the day. If they rely entirely on autonomously generated AI performances without a solid contractual anchor to a specific human likeness, the resulting content is potentially unownable under U.S. IP law. And the U.S. market is where they make their biggest profits.
So that risk forces their hand, even with the cost savings.
Exactly. Which leads us right into the big human barrier, the labor fight, the legal fight, that actually created these protections.
So that overwhelming economic force, that 99% cost reduction temptation, it finally met its organized match in the summer of 2023, the 118-day SAG-AFTRA strike. That wasn't just a typical dispute over, like, streaming residuals, was it? It felt much bigger.
Oh, it was absolutely an existential stand against the complete erosion of their profession by algorithms. It was an historic moment where the union very explicitly framed the fight as a defense of human-centered creativity.
And they were responding to very real threats, like things they were seeing emerge.
Definitely. Like the public unveiling of purely synthetic AI-generated performers. There was one named Tilly Norwood that got attention. The union condemned creations like that as being based on, quote, stolen performances, essentially arguing they were trained on actors' work without consent or compensation. They asserted that creativity is, and fundamentally should remain, human-centered.
And the atmosphere during the strike really reflected those high stakes. There was a lot of acrimony. We saw those reports quoting unnamed executives planning to, quote, drag on until union members start losing their apartments.
Grim stuff.
Yeah. And then you had actors like Bryan Cranston speaking out very publicly, drawing a clear line. He declared, quote, "We will not be having our jobs taken away and given to robots." The resulting agreement, hammered out after all that, it fundamentally altered the landscape.
Absolutely. This conflict forced the creation of a really detailed, legally robust contractual regime built specifically to regulate the use of AI in performance. It establishes clear rules around control, consent, and compensation across 3 distinct protected categories of digital use. It essentially transformed the actor's likeness from just an image that could be exploited into a legally defined, monetizable asset.
And this SAG-AFTRA agreement, it's pretty much the most comprehensive framework like it in the world right now, isn't it? So it's really crucial to understand how it works. Let's break down those 3 categories of digital replica they defined.
Okay, category 1, the employment-based digital replica.
Right, so this is a digital copy created with the performer's actual physical participation, like doing a 3D body and facial scan on set for a specific movie, the kind of thing they likely did with Tom Hanks for Here.
Exactly. Now, for this specific use, the contract mandates 2 key layers of protection. First, informed consent. The studio has to get the actor's explicit permission, and that consent must include a specific, detailed description of how the replica will be used in that motion picture only.
Okay, only for that one film. But what about using it later, like in sequels or other projects?
That's the crucial provision for long-term control. Any use of that replica outside of the original motion picture it was created for requires entirely new consent and separate bargaining for compensation. This is the provision that absolutely blocks that initial studio dream strategy of, scan an actor once and own that likeness forever across all franchises and commercials. That's gone.
Right. That puts the power firmly back in the actor's hands after that first contract ends. Okay, so category 2, the independently created digital replica.
Right. This is a replica that's generated from existing materials like old film footage, archival photos, maybe sound recordings, without the actor needing to participate physically right now. Think about using AI to create a younger version of a currently living actor, based purely on their work from the 1980s.
Okay, like the Irishman scenario, but maybe without the original actors performing now. What's the protection required here?
Again, it requires explicit consent from the living performer or from their estate if they're deceased but still covered under certain rules. And critically, the compensation for this type of use is not tied to minimum wage scales or anything like that. It must be freely bargained, meaning the actor or their representatives can negotiate a high fair market value for using that legacy likeness. They can treat it like the valuable intellectual property it is.
Got it. Okay, and the third category. This one seems the most forward-looking, addressing characters like that synthetic Tilly Norwood example, the synthetic performer.
Yes. This is defined as a wholly digital AI-generated character that is not based on the likeness of any single identifiable human. The contract recognizes that this category poses the most direct risk of job displacement, especially for that vulnerable middle class of actors we discussed.
So what did the union get here?
Producers are required to provide notice to the union whenever they intend to use a synthetic performer in a significant way. And crucially, they must then bargain with the union over whether compensation or some other consideration is appropriate for using that synthetic performer instead of a human.
So even if the character itself isn't based on a human, the union still maintains a seat at the table. They have oversight to prevent the labor market from just being flooded with free synthetic content without any discussion or potential compensation flowing back to the labor pool it might displace.
Exactly. It keeps the union involved as the technology evolves. And let's not forget, there are also explicit protections baked in for background actors. The contract specifically prohibits using digital replicas of background actors just to get around the contractually required minimum number of human performers needed on a set.
So overall, these provisions seem pretty comprehensive. A fundamental revaluation of human consent and likeness in the digital age, negotiated through collective bargaining.
It's a landmark agreement, no question.
Now, beyond just the union contract, there's also a push to solidify these kinds of rights through federal law, right? Moving beyond the sort of messy patchwork of state-level right of publicity laws that exist now. That leads to this proposed No Fakes Act.
That's right. That's the motivation behind the Nurture Originals, Foster Art, and Keep Entertainment Safe Act, the No Fakes Act. Right now, your ability to control your own digital likeness, your voice, your image, it's governed by this confusing mix of different state laws. Some states have strong protections, others have very weak ones, or none at all. This act aims to create the first ever federal intellectual property right covering an individual's voice and visual likeness.
Okay, so what specifically would this federal law do that the current state laws or even the SAG contract don't already cover?
It would establish a single national standard, making it illegal to produce or distribute an unauthorized digital replica, a deepfake, essentially of any individual, not just celebrities, but you, me, anyone listening, if it's used without consent in an audiovisual work or a sound recording that's intended for commercial purposes or public distribution.
Any individual. That's broad.
Very broad. And the protection would extend for 70 years after the individual's death, providing a durable right for their estates to manage their legacy. It would also impose liability on online platforms, like social media sites, that host unauthorized deepfakes if they know about the unauthorized content and fail to take it down within a reasonable time frame.
It sounds incredibly protective on the surface. But you mentioned there are challenges getting it passed, particularly around the First Amendment and, like, artistic expression concerns.
That is the absolute critical sticking point in Congress right now. The bill tries to include exemptions for types of speech that are traditionally protected under the First Amendment, things like parody, satire, news reporting, documentary filmmaking, biopics.
Okay, seems reasonable.
However, critics, including some civil rights groups and major technology firms, argue that the specific language defining those exceptions is too vague, potentially too narrow. There's a significant fear that if the act is written too broadly in restricting how likenesses can be used, especially for transformative works, commentary, or parody, it could be challenged and potentially struck down in court. There's a lot of legal precedent that prioritizes free speech and fair use, especially online.
So it's a balancing act.
It's an extremely difficult balancing act. How do you strongly protect an individual's identity rights without inadvertently crippling legitimate forms of expression, criticism, or art that might need to use or reference a likeness? Navigating that is the central challenge.
Okay, now let's pivot to what might be the single most important existing legal constraint on the whole studio business model regarding AI. The thing that maybe underpins even the union's leverage, the copyright conundrum. You call this the paradoxical risk that ultimately undermines the pure economic argument for full AI replacement.
Yes. This is where the studios are kind of forced into collaboration, or at least incorporating human elements, more out of legal self-preservation than necessarily artistic preference. The core principle here, under current U.S. copyright law, is the human authorship requirement.
Human authorship requirement, meaning?
Meaning, to be eligible for copyright protection in the United States, a work must fundamentally be created by a human being.
Okay, so works that are generated autonomously by a machine, like an AI, without sufficient creative input or control or direction coming from a human hand.
Those aren't copyrightable.
Exactly. The U.S. Copyright Office has been pretty consistent on this since about 2023. They've issued guidance stating that autonomous machine generation, where the AI is making the core creative choices, falls short of the human authorship standard. The AI itself is not a legal person. It cannot be considered an author under the law, so it cannot hold a copyright in its own output.
So what happens to that output then? If an AI generates an image or a script or maybe a video of a synthetic character performing, where does the ownership lie? It likely falls immediately into the public domain, meaning anyone could potentially use it.
Okay, let me try to make this really concrete. Let's say a studio invests, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars using AI to create a totally new, purely synthetic character, a potential franchise star, let's call him, Kronos the Conqueror.
Okay.
And Kronos becomes this global phenomenon, huge hit movie, merchandise, sequels planned.
Under current law, the studio might have no legal ability to actually copyright or protect Kronos the Conqueror as their intellectual property. A rival studio, a toy company, an advertiser, anyone could potentially start using Kronos the Conqueror in their own films, their own products, their own ads, and the original studio might have no legal recourse to stop them.
That's an existential threat to the whole studio business model, isn't it? Which is built entirely on creating, owning, and fiercely protecting valuable, proprietary, franchisable IP.
Absolutely. It creates this fundamental conflict within the studio itself.
Yeah.
The accounting department is looking at AI and saying, use purely synthetic actors. It's 99.98% cheaper. But the legal department is screaming, wait, if you use purely synthetic actors, we might not own the resulting character or the movie. That multi-million-dollar asset could be worthless and we'd be exposed to endless copying.
So that dilemma basically forces the studio's hand, doesn't it?
It does. It makes it legally and financially far more prudent, far safer, for them to pay a significant licensing fee to a human actor for the rights to use their digital likeness, a likeness that is protectable through right of publicity laws, potentially the End No Fakes Act if it passes, and critically, the new SAG-AFTRA contract, rather than risk investing billions in creating an unprotected, potentially unownable synthetic character entirely from scratch.
So the legal framework, combined with the union contract, didn't exactly ban AI, but it cleverly made human consent the essential, legally defensible input required to create monetizable intellectual property in this space.
That's the strategic outcome, yes. Human involvement became the key to ownership.
Okay, so we've looked at the technology, the truly overwhelming economics, and then these complex labor and legal constraints that act as a barrier. But the final judge in this whole battle, the ultimate arbiter, isn't a lawyer or a union boss or a studio head, is it? It's the audience, us, the consumers paying to watch this stuff.
Absolutely. Audience acceptance is the critical factor that often gets overlooked in purely technical or economic discussions. And here we come back one last time to that uncanny valley.
Right.
Even if AI achieves near-perfect visual realism, those near-perfect digital characters still risk shattering our suspension of disbelief, making us feel uneasy, alienated. It's not just about looking perfectly human. The performance has to feel human. It has to convey those subtle, often contradictory micro-expressions and timings that make up a believable human performance.
And what about that deeper issue, the lack of, genuineness? Can audiences ultimately tell if an emotional performance is just being generated by an algorithm that has no memory, no actual life experience, no soul, for lack of a better word?
Well, the sources we looked at suggest that audiences may, perhaps subconsciously, perceive that lack of an inner world. An AI performance is based on pattern matching from data. It can replicate the external signs of grief perfectly, having analyzed thousands of images of grieving people, but it has never actually experienced loss itself. And while viewers can certainly form bonds with AI characters that exhibit predictable behaviors, like in video games perhaps, they seem to struggle with the perception of authentic emotional engagement from them. That perceived lack of genuine empathy can prevent the deep connection that's really crucial for compelling drama, for catharsis, for lasting artistic relevance.
Which brings us to the core philosophical question facing the whole creative community right now. Is AI fundamentally a tool that augments human creativity, or is it ultimately a replacement that devalues it?
You hear strong arguments on both sides. Proponents make the augmentation argument. They see AI as this incredibly powerful new paintbrush, a tool that democratizes filmmaking, especially for independent creators who can't afford huge crews or expensive effects.
Excellent.
They argue it can handle the tedious B-roll, the technical grunt work like rotoscoping or basic sound mixing, freeing up human artists to focus their limited resources and time on the high-level storytelling, the artistic vision, the performance. It could potentially level the playing field against the mega studios.
Okay, that's the optimistic view. But then there's the counter-argument, the devaluation argument, which warns about, creative stagnation, homogeneity.
Exactly. Critics fear that content generated predominantly from existing patterns because AI learns from what already exists will inevitably lead to formulaic, derivative, homogeneous work. If the AI is only trained on past film history, it's inherently backward-looking, isn't it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
They argue that true, groundbreaking artistry often stems from unique human life experience, the unexpected, the messy, the pain, the joy, the specific cultural nuances things an algorithm, by its nature, cannot replicate authentically. If AI starts automating creativity itself, they worry the authenticity, the spark of the cinematic experience erodes, creating what one commentator bleakly called the aesthetic equivalent of fast food, just endless predictable content.
So factoring in everything we've discussed, the tech, the economics, the law, the audience, what does the synthesis suggest for the actual future? Our sources seem to lay out three possible scenarios.
Right. The first scenario, and the one considered most likely in the near to medium term, is the hybrid model. This is basically the negotiated future that seems to be emerging from the strike and the current legal reality.
What does that look like?
A-list actors successfully license their digital likenesses as highly profitable personal assets, secured by those ironclad legal contracts we talked about. Meanwhile, working actors find new, union-protected jobs providing the crucial voice and performance capture needed to animate synthetic characters, effectively becoming digital puppeteers or directors of performance data. AI becomes ubiquitous as an augmentation tool for de-aging, for virtual sets, for background crowds, but fully synthetic lead characters remain relatively niche, mainly due to those IP ownership risks and ongoing audience skepticism.
Okay, the hybrid model. That feels plausible. What's scenario two?
Scenario 2 is the bifurcated market. This suggests a clear, maybe even intentional split emerges in the kind of content being produced. A two-tiered system.
Tell me more.
Yeah. You'd have the prestige tier, think auteur-driven films, festival darlings, movies aiming for critical acclaim and Oscars. This tier will actively market itself as being purely human-made. You might even see disclaimers on screen or in marketing. No generative AI was used in the creation of this content.
Like an organic label for movies?
Exactly. It becomes a marker of quality, of authenticity, of artistic integrity. Then you have the second tier, likely driven by the high-volume needs of streaming platforms. This tier will fully embrace AI for mass-produced, highly cost-effective genre content, the action sequels, the rom-coms, the sci-fi series needed to fill schedules. Maybe what some cynically call the slop tier, designed for passive viewing rather than deep engagement.
Okay, if I'm sitting at home watching a new blockbuster franchise movie on a streaming service 5 years from now,
Yeah.
how will I, as an audience member, know if I'm watching something from the human-made prestige tier or the potentially AI-heavy, mass-produced slop tier?
That's a great question. You might have to look for subtle giveaways, maybe slightly generic dialogue, character designs that look suspiciously similar to other popular content because they're drawn from similar data pools, and perhaps most tellingly, you might still perceive that subtle audio-visual desynchrony we discussed earlier, that slight offness in the performance. But over time, I suspect the human-made label itself will become the key marketing differentiator for premium content, forcing creators who want that prestige to be transparent about their methods.
Interesting. Okay, and the third scenario. This one you said was more speculative.
Right. That's the synthetic studio future. This is a scenario where studios actually manage to create, own, and franchise purely synthetic stars like our fictional Cronus the Conqueror, doing it all without significant human creative input driving the core performance or character.
But didn't we establish that's legally risky?
Exactly. This scenario is only really possible if U.S. intellectual property law undergoes a fundamental shift. If Congress, or maybe the Supreme Court, decides to grant copyright protection to works generated autonomously by AI, until and unless that human authorship requirement is fundamentally changed or overturned, this synthetic studio scenario remains largely speculative and, frankly, legally indefensible for major studios aiming to build lasting, protectable franchises.
Okay, that clarifies the potential paths. So let's tie this all together for you, the listener. Give us a strategic summary. What are the key takeaways for navigating this new landscape?
Okay, 3 main points, I think. First, the paradigm shift for actors is now complete. Their focus has to move away from simply fighting AI towards successfully managing their digital likeness, treating it as a controlled, monetizable asset, almost like managing their own personal trademark or franchise brand. Consent is their power.
Right. Second takeaway.
Second, the primary barrier stopping studios from going full throttle on AI replacement right now is not the technology itself, nor even the cost of implementing AI. It is the complex, binding legal and labor framework that was established by the union contract and is fundamentally underpinned by existing intellectual property law, especially copyright.
Okay.
And finally, the new essential human role emerging in this ecosystem is that of the gatekeeper. The legally defensible human likeness has become the most valuable raw asset in the entire content industrial complex, and the human actor is the indispensable gatekeeper of the consent, the control, and therefore ultimately the profit derived from that asset.
That brings our deep dive perfectly full circle. We've seen this incredible, overwhelming technological push, and the undeniable economic incentives meet fierce, organized human resistance through the strike, which then leverage existing IP law to create a defensible barrier. The result, at least for now, is this hybrid future where human consent has become the most valuable commodity precisely because it's the only commodity that currently grants legal ownership and protection over the final creative product.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought, really circling back to the audience and the future of art itself. If AI technology eventually does achieve flawless visual perfection, if it masters all the external signs of human emotion replicating joy, fear, sorrow perfectly based on data, will audiences eventually stop caring about the lack of an inner life behind that performance? Will we come to accept algorithmically perfect emotion as functionally equal to genuine human experience?
Right.
Or will that human-made label, that knowledge of authentic experience behind the art, become the ultimate, most valuable marker of quality, ensuring that human connection, that spark of genuine feeling, ultimately triumphs over pure, cold efficiency? What does our acceptance or our rejection of that perfectly synthetic performance ultimately say about the future of art, and maybe even the future of human connection itself?
A really compelling question to leave you with. Thank you for diving deep with us today.